Hi there. Welcome to your video course entitled Consciousness, Creativity, and Contribution. All success begins in the mind. Consequently, although there is a lot of content here on Delphin World that deals with the proven and practical steps that successful people follow to create success, much of the material here on this website is designed to prepare your mind to produce that success. The first two videos of this set will be about consciousness, followed by two about creativity, and then two more about contribution. Your creativity determines your contributions, and your contributions create your manifest success. However, since your creativity is a product of your mind and the activities of your mind have their genesis in your consciousness, in order to become a conscious creator of success, it helps to have an understanding of what consciousness is and how you can utilize that understanding to enhance your ability to create your self-actualization and your success. So let's jump right in and talk about one of the biggest mysteries of all, consciousness. Many of today's scientists and evolutionary biologists refer to consciousness as the hard problem. They call it the hard problem because they cannot figure out how something as ethereal as consciousness arises out of a material universe. And that is because their premise is wrong. They have it backwards. Consciousness does not arise out of a material universe. The material universe springs forth from consciousness. Okay, back in September of 1995, I sat outside in the California sunshine with my back against a tree, with a pen and a pad of paper in hand, and began to write a work that would evolve to become the 3 books of the Delphin trilogy. And since then, tens of thousands of people all around the world have used the Delphin trilogy as their primary tool for personal self-knowledge and intentional transformation. And your continuing membership here in Delphin World includes access to video versions of that material. Okay, I will now read you the first 3 paragraphs of the first book of that trilogy, which is called The Initiation. The most vital understanding one needs to acquire in order to maximize one's relationship to oneself, to life, and to the ongoing process of creation is the concept of consciousness. Consciousness is not just some byproduct of the human brain mass. Consciousness is all-pervasive. It is in everything and is everywhere. Your individual human consciousness exists within and is a part of a universal consciousness. This all-encompassing universal consciousness is individualized in the human being. There is no separation, but the personality or ego of the human being allows for a perceived separation and a unique perspective of the world. What I wrote back then is in direct opposition to the theory that mind and consciousness are a product of the evolution of the material universe and the human brain. It is typical for most people to think of consciousness as something uniquely human, at least that state of mind referred to as self-consciousness. Some even go so far as to say that consciousness is a state that is caused by the human brain, an epiphenomenal result of brain mass, an electrochemical accident of biological evolution. Most people, actually, tend to believe that their own ability to be aware of their own consciousness is so unique and special that in this world, and perhaps even in the entire universe, only Homo sapiens, human beings, are capable of being fully conscious or sentient. But this is not true. Consciousness is not a uniquely human phenomenon and is not something that somehow came to exist in this universe. Consciousness is the ground of all being. Consciousness is not just present in human beings, and it is not a result of humans evolving to have big brains. Consciousness is not just present in all creation. Consciousness is the source of all creation. Now, I know that is a bold statement that runs counter to the common story that many people have about the nature of consciousness. And so, I am going to bring in a few eminent minds to affirm the truth of my assertion that consciousness is the fundamental and creative force behind everything. Let's start with a man by the name of Sir James Jeans, who was an English physicist, astronomer, and mathematician who taught at both the universities of Cambridge and Princeton. In his own words, "I incline to the idealistic theory that consciousness is fundamental and that the material universe is derivative from consciousness, not consciousness from the material universe. In general, the universe seems to me to be nearer a great thought than a great machine. It may well be, it seems to me, that each individual consciousness ought to be compared to a brain cell in a universal mind. Consciousness is fundamental, and the material universe is derivative from consciousness, not consciousness from the material universe." Okay, now let's bring in the man who changed the way we understand everything about reality. And I mean everything. Max Planck was the originator of quantum theory. Quantum theory radically transformed human understanding about the nature of reality. More than Isaac Newton's universal theory of gravity, more than Albert Einstein's special and general theories of relativity, more even than Edwin Hubble's discovery of the existence of galaxies beyond our own. And this is what he had to say. As a physicist who has devoted his whole life to rational science, to the study of matter, I think I can safely claim to be above any suspicion of irrational exuberance. Having said that, I would like to observe that my research on the atom has shown me that there is no such thing as matter in itself. What we perceive as matter is merely the manifestation of a force that causes the subatomic particles to oscillate and holds them together in the tiniest solar system of the universe. This force that is active within the atom comes from a conscious and intelligent mind. That mind is the ultimate source of matter. I regard consciousness as fundamental, and I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. And the next of my eminent scientists is Erwin Schrödinger, who was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for his work on wave mechanics. He is most famous for his thought experiment of a cat in a box that is both dead and alive at the same time. And these are his words. "The reason why our sentient percipient and thinking is met nowhere within our scientific world picture can easily be indicated in 7 words. because it is itself that world picture. It is identical with the whole and is therefore cannot be contained in it as a part of it. Consciousness is that by which this world first becomes manifest, by which indeed we can quite calmly say it first becomes present, that the world consists of the elements of consciousness. Consciousness cannot be accounted for in physical terms, for consciousness is absolutely fundamental. Okay. Those are the expressed thoughts of three wise men who had dedicated their entire lives to the study of material science. So now let's return to my thoughts and my words. In order for the human creature to become fully aware of its own nature and creative potential, it must first come to understand the concept of consciousness. The idea that only humans possess consciousness is a delusional deceit. Human consciousness is so enthralled with its own discovery, its own ability to self-reference, that it interprets its inability to perceive of all that which lies outside of its own perceptual abilities as evidence that consciousness is a unique activity of the human brain. But to decide that simply because something is outside of or beyond our normal perceptual abilities should mean that it should be interpreted to mean that it is non-existent is the folly of fools. Human consciousness or intellect stares blindly at a 5 billion-year-old star which sustains not only itself but also all life on planet Earth and perceives no conscious activity, and therefore concludes that there is none. Our inability to perceive any consciousness resident in our sun does not mean that there is none. Modern humans also walk around on this planet whose biosphere magically enables their existence, along with the myriad of other life forms, without sensing and thus not believing in a planetary consciousness. But our limited ability to perceive is proof only of our limited ability to perceive. We marvel at the complexity of matter, the behavior of our own cellular structures, and the vastness of the universe, but we decide that it is mechanistic, unconscious stuff simply obeying the laws of nature. We refuse to imagine that each and every part of the entire cosmos is, in its own way, conscious and is acting in harmony with a creative pattern or idealization emanating from a common source, a universal consciousness. This universality of consciousness has been experienced by individuals for millennia, but has not been accepted in our modern rational worldview because it is non-rational and does not make sense to those caught up in the scientific materialist view of the nature of reality. This rational approach says that only that which can be perceived and then validated through experience or experiment is real, and all else is not. So if an individual happens to have an experience of transcendence or a glimpse of the universality of consciousness, it is either ignored by our culture or dismissed as a chemical incident of brain. But those who have experienced the transcendent speak almost poetically of the spirit of things as being the true reality and assert irrationally that everything is united in one sacred consciousness that is the source of all that is. In sum, They aver that the physical arises out of the metaphysical. The real emerges from the ethereal. Now, this may sound purely psycho-spiritual, but it should not be difficult even for the strictly rational mind to comprehend. We know that the neural activity of our brain is dependent upon the cellular structure of our brain, which in turn is determined by its molecular construction. Molecules are predicated upon atomic combination. Atoms are constructed out of quantum particles defined by subquantum wavicles, and subquantum stuff being constituted of pure energy and light tied into knots. In other words, self-referencing light. The physical emerges from the metaphysical, the real from the ethereal. Brain cells emerge from light. Consciousness is in the light prior to it existing within brain cells or neural connections. Consciousness is the primal source that chooses to become matter by immersing itself in its own imagined creation through the subquantum dance patterns of light that spontaneously emerge to form quantum particles and then further complexify to form atoms, then molecules, then cells, then you. Every quark, every muon, every graviton, every electron, every photon, and every neuron is imbued with consciousness and is a manifestation of consciousness. Consciousness expresses itself vibrationally, geometrically, mathematically, physically forming patterns out of the potentiality created through the process of self-referencing. Okay, so that is now the fourth time I have used those words, self-referencing. So I'm going to spend a little time here explaining the term self-referencing because it is essential for a deeper understanding of what the self is. When I say, I am happy or I am creative, it is a self-referential statement. If I say that the cells of my body are made out of recycled star ashes, I am making a self-referential statement. Humans self-reference all the time, but self-referencing is not just a human action. For example, if you are using a computer program, say Excel, and you input a new number in a column, the Excel program self-references its own programming in order to recalculate the new total that results from the new entry. Self-referencing is also what electrons do when they either take on or release a photon in order to make the quantum jump from one orbital pattern or different orbital pattern. Self-referencing is also what photons do when they are shot at a screen during the double slit experiment and decide to act either as a particle or as a wave, depending upon what the observer is doing. Self-referencing is also what you do when you become conscious of being conscious, aware of being aware. In other words, self-awareness is self-referencing. If you are walking in the forest and notice the smell of the pine trees, you are, in effect, Mother Nature noticing an aspect of herself. Since you are a part of the life forms on planet Earth, you are life, or Mother Nature. And in noticing or paying attention to some other aspect of Mother Nature, like the scent of pine trees, you are Mother Nature self-referencing. And when you gaze out at universe, you are the universe self-referencing. You are the universe being self-aware. And when you create a concept or an image in your imagination and use that conceptualization to make something manifest in the external world, you are, like the Excel program I just mentioned, self-referencing in order to create a new result. Your consciousness is the individualization of this universal consciousness, and as such is the same in kind and quality. This understanding is vitally important because if consciousness is behind all creation, then it follows that your consciousness, which exists within this universal consciousness, is necessarily creative as well, and as such has the capacity for deliberate creation using self-referential idealization and conceptualization. Learning to connect with and integrate your personal consciousness with this universal intelligence will not just enhance your personal power to be consciously creative, it will uplift the whole grand narrative of the human species. Okay, my previous scientists were old dead guys. Let's bring in some new blood, some newer voices to this conversation. First, a quantum physicist by the name of Amit Goswami, author of several books, including one called The Self-Aware Universe. He has this to say: the new paradigm posits instead a monism based on the primacy of consciousness, that consciousness, not matter, is the ground of all being. It is a monism based on a consciousness that is unitive and transcendent, but one that becomes many in sentient beings such as us. We are that consciousness. All the world of experience, including matter, is the material manifestation of transcendent forms of consciousness. And another physicist who writes books about quantum physics and shamanic science, and who playfully has a comic character of himself named Dr. Quantum, Fred Alan Wolf, has this to say: quantum physics really begins to point to this discovery. It says that you can't have a universe without mind entering into it, and that the mind is actually shaping the very thing that is being perceived. Consciousness is the creative element in the universe. Without it, nothing would appear. And now let's hear from Peter Russell, who has degrees in theoretical physics, mathematics, and computer science. Consciousness is not located anywhere within the world. The whole world, our entire image of reality, including our bodies and brains, is itself a manifestation within consciousness. Consciousness is the container of our world. It is not contained within it. The universe is a dynamic, structured field of being, observing itself, and in observing itself, creating a representation of itself as the material world. And finally, let's hear from yet another PhD in quantum physics by the name of John Hagelin, who has this to say: when individuals are established in universal consciousness, they live the scientific reality of the unity of life spontaneously in accord with all the laws of nature. This experience alone will transform our collective reality, our human civilization, to one of unity, peace, and harmony. Okay, That is enough from our scientists. Let's talk about what all this means to you and your ability to create and live a successful and fulfilling life. I think that the fundamental understanding that we all need to come to if we are ever to claim our personal power to become truly creative and capable of participating in the ongoing evolution of the universe is to recognize that our individual consciousness is an indivisible part of universal consciousness, in the same way that we understand that our body is an indivisible part of universe. We each need to understand and integrate the idea that just as we exist physically within universe, our consciousness also exists metaphysically within a universal consciousness, which has brought all things into being and continues to sustain and enliven the entire physical universe. And just as our body is an individual but indivisible aspect of the physical universe composed of the same fundamental physical elements that make up the entirety of the universe, our consciousness is an individual and indivisible aspect of the metaphysical universe composed out of the same elements, characteristics, and qualities that make up universal consciousness. And as such, our individual consciousness is the same in kind and quality as is universal consciousness, which means that we have the power to create what we envision. We can bring something into physical existence out of the non-physical realm of imagination through volitional and intentional thought. I believe this is a fundamental tenet, a foundational belief that we all need to get to if we are to ever fully develop ourselves personally, to fully self-actualize, and fully develop our personal power to be consciously creative in this universe. And it is a fundamental understanding we need to come to not just as individuals, but as a species if we are ever going to move up into the next level of our evolution within universe and become capable of all we're capable of becoming as individuals and as a species. This is a fundamental paradigm shift away from the idea of the material brain body being the origin of mind and of consciousness. We need to start thinking of our personal consciousness and self-awareness as being individual aspects of universal consciousness, and the material world, including our body, brain, being the result of consciousness. As soon as we learn to reconceptualize ourselves, we move from being creatures of event and circumstance into being creators of event and circumstance. This is a big step from creature to creator. Are you ready? Let me spin an analogy for you. Although I do not play video games, I like some of the metaphors that the digital world provides to real life. So please follow me on this one. If you were to enter into a MMORPG, a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, you would take on an avatar and play a role within an online virtual world in which there are many other avatars controlled by other real and conscious players with whom you get to interact. Your avatar is imbued with your ability to make conscious choices about how to play the game and create success within the game. There are Also, many other characters in the game known as NPCs or non-player characters. These are not avatars controlled by some real conscious person. They are just automated, pre-programmed characters without any free will or ability to do anything other than act out the assigned role they have been programmed to carry out. These NPCs can respond to outside stimuli and interact according to their programming with the conscious avatars, and so they can appear to be almost as real as an avatar that has an imbued consciousness, but they are not self-aware entities like the avatar you are inhabiting in the game. In other words, although they may appear to be real characters when not closely observed, these NPCs are mere creatures of events and circumstance and only behave according to their programming. The avatars, on the other hand, although they are inhabiting the same rule-based virtual world, are capable of choice-making and are thus creators of event and circumstance within the game and have an effect on how the game plays out and how the other avatars experience the game. Those folks who, in our world, our analog world, are unaware of and disconnected from their higher consciousness and behave only according to their unconscious programming are like those NPCs. You change from being an NPC, a non-player character in a virtual reality video game, into being an active character controlled by a conscious, choice-enabled being when you recognize that you can opt out of your programming and choose to become a self-realized and self-actualized player by recognizing your intimate connection to universal consciousness. Now let's expand this analogy. In life, you are playing a role. The question you need to ask yourself is it one that has been assigned to you, a role that you have been pre-programmed to play, or is it a self-assigned role that you have chosen to take on? Are you acting like a programmed NPC or non-player character, or are you acting like a choice-enabled avatar with a greater consciousness behind it? Another way to ask the question is, who painted you into this picture? Waking up to your intimate connection to a universal consciousness is akin to your game avatar becoming conscious of the consciousness that is active within it, within the game. Your game avatar wakes up to the greater aspect of itself and learns how to effectively and successfully play the game. And that is exactly what you are after, right? Learning to successfully play the game. Okay, this is a good place to end this first module. So another question for you. Is it time to wake up to the greater consciousness that is resident in you? I will leave you to ponder all this, and I will see you next in Module 2. Ciao for now.